Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to welcome the two main developers of the DITA Open Toolkit, R.Anderson and Elovirta.
The DITA-OT twins.
I couldn't quite manage the beard, but
Yeah.
I came as close as I could with the,
Gotta lose the tie.
He couldn't manage the time.
But then we wouldn't have our little Star Wars. He's got some secret Star Wars stuff under there. So, what do you want to talk about? Yeah. What are we missing? Where would you like to see us go? The idea behind this is really that we are the two main developers on the toolkit, but we both have our own views of how the toolkit is used, how it should be used, what needs to be in there, what should be kept separate. So we want to talk about how we both see the toolkit and its use, and then try to get feedback from you as to whether anybody sees it like we do or thinks we see it wrong, or what other perspectives there are out there. And for missing perspectives, maybe we can talk some of you into providing those more frequently, helping out, or how can we see those things, those perspectives that we're missing. So, first up is for Jarno to talk about how he sees things.
No, it's not.
Oh, no?
Which slide is this?
Oh, we jumped ahead a slide. Sorry,
Okay,
jump
sorry.
back. We all see the world in our own way. Let's see. Which cat are you up there?
The left one?
The left one? Okay. I'm the middle one with glowing eyes. I guess that makes this Roger. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, as I said, we all see things a little bit differently. So we're going to talk about how Jarno sees it, how I see it, and then how you do. What are we missing?
Okay.
There we go.
So the way my development and involvement with OT usually goes is that I have absolutely no contact surface with anyone who's using Open Toolkit. So I'm developing things as I see fit, as I think the tool should work. That might not have anything to do with how you think it should work. And let's see if this works. Here's my product owner for Open Toolkit. So this hasn't been staged. This actually happened. So my product owner is a bit weird sometimes. She likes to chew on cords.
As most writers do.
Yeah. And the ideas that she comes up with might not actually make sense for you. And then there's Robert.
Yeah, so this is literally the road I traveled a couple days ago. I would not recommend following that road to anybody in this room ever. But that said, the road I travel more frequently, I've got some points up here. Basically, I'm responsible to the authors in IBM. That's why I work on the project. That's what IBM pays me to do when I'm contributing to the project. Those authors, a lot of them have 15 years of ingrained habits as to how they think things should work. And many of those writers come after me quite loudly when those things change. They want backwards compatibility going back 15 or 20 years. That is absolutely not true of all of them. Some of them want me to break everything to give them a new feature. So I have quite a wide audience that I have to serve. They work on very different products and very different needs, very different ways of displaying their end information. As mentioned earlier, I'm also in a position of trying to support all of them with one copy of the toolkit because there's one place to go. We don't want to have custom toolkits that are sent around to people. We want to have one version on the cloud that everybody can run. So it's a little bit difficult to balance those sometimes. Extensions I make to the toolkit, basically whenever I add something new, whether it's a fix or a feature, I just on my own decide, is this something that the wider community might be interested in? If so, make it a pull request against the toolkit. If it's not, if it's something that's just to meet IBM style, put it in one of our plugins. And that's sort of how I do development work on the toolkit. And yeah, everybody that I support is on the same road using the same toolkit, but they want to go very different places. But they do really want, I have encountered a lot of people who want everything to work the same but different at the same time. And by that I mean, when I've talked to Jarno in the past, he has said, if you have a custom PDF type, if you have your own style overrides, you have options that you always use, that should be a PDF transform type. It should be a plugin in the toolkit where you say, this is my PDF. That's all you have to set. And in the general case, I absolutely agree. That is perfect. And I've tried to set that up internally to some extent, where we have IBM PDF, and for most people that gives everything they need. But because I have these audiences, we also have people that say, I want my PDF but looking like this. And if I have transform type of my PDF but looking like this, and my PDF but looking like that, people get angry. They all want to call one my PDF, but then have their own little tweaks. Yes?
An idea. Are we using the wrong terminology? Because,
Maybe.
like, for example, Jekyll, they have themes,
Yeah.
lots of different publishing engines, and Word has themes. So what if we call them, instead of saying transformation type, we have a theme, then it's easier to actually tell them that, so you want theme A and theme B at the same time, but they need to be different.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense, of course. That's what cats do. But maybe it's easier to sell. And
They want to be both inside and outside.
exactly.
Yes.
So if we rephrase it, maybe they understand that what they're asking is impossible in most worlds.
Yeah, and actually that is sort of keys on to one thing that is more like we worked in the world before DITA-OT, in our SGML world, where we had one PDF. There was only one PDF, but then there was a style, and style covered the theme, basically. We could, we present the toolkit through a cloud portal, basically, where people go and say, I want to start a PDF build, and they select IBM PDF. And what we could have them do is just say, I want PDF and a list of styles. And that translates to transform type equals PDF with style Z, something like that. Yeah.
Shall we proceed
Continue?
to the
Yes.
next slide? Brilliant.
So, now's the point where we try to get people in the audience to talk. This is always the fun part.
So if we were mean, we tell you to pick a partner, work in groups for 5 minutes, then come back, and we'll sort of, everyone comes forward and contributes their ideas, and then we gather those, and then afterwards we'll come back to you. But it'll be a year, so it'll be easier if we just shout on top of each other.
Also, we're not mean. I mean, we're not cats. So
Yeah.
yeah. Yes.
To prevent that scenario, I volunteers.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually I'm more on your role, because you two are both living on the bleeding edge and trying to put forward toolkits of anything you see or makes sense. What we then as users, the company trying to use the product is trying to get this into a way that we can take the best out of it for a pretty long time. And given the fact that some companies use the DITA-OT toolkit and are still stuck to other things, this is just a kind of show. Question can I talk to Jan or show me whether it would be possible for us to work with them, whatever format, to have some sort of long-term support, which is basically, yeah, we had the trouble of transition from 1.8 to 2.0, and some of them haven't even done that yet. And to prevent something like this in the future, something like long-term support would be great. Jenkins does it, others do it. Given the fact that you two basically doing the work is something different, but the general idea is
Yeah. So one comment I'd like to make before.
Could you rephrase the question?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I think we need to run around with the mic again.
Yeah, the mic
You have
would be-
experience with that?
Yes, George is good at running with mics, as we've seen previous years. I think the comment sort of started off with a world more like mine, with concerns for backwards compatibility, stability, things continuing to work, but turned into the question of long-term support and how do we do that, and that's something that's come up in the past. And I would just like to note, while that question about long-term support was being asked, I heard a lot of pros out there, cawing at us and ravens, whatever, and scrabbling at the windows to get in, and I think that was kind of appropriate. It's difficult, as you say. Jarno does this as a volunteer. I am responsible to IBM. IBM is never going to pay me to do long-term support for people outside, because few people in IBM are using older versions of the toolkit. They're basically using whatever I've managed to get our stuff up to. Yeah, we don't have a community as big as the ones you mentioned, Jekyll and the others, Jenkins, whichever ones you mentioned. Yeah, we don't have a large community supporting. So the long-term support at this point has basically become DITA users, and that is unfortunate. And none of us really like the fact that that's the case, but we haven't had other people contribute to the level that would allow it.
Yeah, I agree that we're too small for this. If we were a bigger community and we had more users, then maybe some company would offer that support. It wouldn't need to be us. In many open source projects where they have commercial support, but the actual software is developed in the open. The company gets their revenue from support and so forth. But our project is just so small. We have so few users. It would be a really nice thing to offer, and that's it, sort of. It would be nice, but...
Yeah, we're big enough that a lot of people want it. We're small enough that companies so far haven't been interested in offering it as a service.
And it sort of applies to like long-term support, which in my mind means we still backport bug fixes to 1.8 and 1.5 and 1.4. No one's using 1.3 because OpenToolkit became usable at 1.4 point something.
More or less, yeah.
Yeah. So we wouldn't go back to 1.0, although 1.0.1 was released almost immediately after, so there was something wrong with it. One is to backport bug fixes, which would be nice for people stuck on a given old version. And then we need this plugin development. It will take 4 days. Will you do it? So that's one other thing that some companies might want to purchase. And I don't know if anyone's offering that sort of ad hoc or retainer type of support.
Any other comments about how people use the toolkit, what they want from the toolkit? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, right, microphone. Come on, George, speed it up. Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Yeah, I know. Just describing the way in which I've come across this thing is that I consider the base DITA-OT which comes in near enough as a non-modifiable black box, which has got sufficient entry points so that I can modify it and do my stuff on top of that. So it's more the case that you want to have sufficient information in the base tool to say this is where you can start doing your stuff. One issue which we have at the moment, as you realise from what I was saying earlier, we have a rather large and very disparate user base, and when ideas are being put to your product owner, could we consider the various personae of the users? We have got non-technical users, we have got technical writers, we have got people who do the development, and for example, we have an issue coming up between 2.5 and 3.0
because some of them haven't got Java 1.8 in there. And you think, is there a way we can keep people from having to update their machine, or do we need to put this through Docker, or what things could we do to try and minimize the pain for our users? One idea here, because this seems to be particularly the case with 1.8.5, which I think everyone else will be through, it's painful upgrading from 1.8.5 to something else. Any chance we could collate some 1.8.5 to 2.0 war stories to work out, oh yeah, I had that problem too.
Well, a lot of those war stories, I think, have ended up in the docs and the migration notes. There are migration notes about getting to 2.0, which is...
That's certainly improved.
Yeah.
When we were upgrading, that wasn't there.
Oh, okay. Well, yes. Roger, did you have something to add, or...
Yeah, I just
Shout out.
wanted to say that's a good opportunity to reiterate a point that I try to make every year, is that if you go that path and you have that war story and you took notes on what you needed to do to make it work,
Yeah.
we want those notes.
Yeah, so we want those stories, and whether that's editing the page and submitting a pull request, or opening an issue saying, I ran into all these problems, and this is what I did to fix them. You know, maybe there are better ways to do it, but that's the start. That would be something to add. Yeah.
Because we know that those migrating topics don't yet contain all of the things that we know need to be done to migrate. Those are just sort of a collection of notes that people have been kind enough to provide. You know, there have been random people that mentioned on the DITA users list that when someone asked a question about how to migrate, they said, oh yeah, I have an Excel table of all the stuff that changed from that release to that one. I was like, okay, so I wrote that person and said, can I have that Excel table, please? And guess what? I got it. So it didn't make its way in yet, but I mean, there's so much we can do with the resources that we have, and it makes it so much easier if those of you that need to port these things actually just take note of what you did, because whatever problems you had, chances are someone else may have.
These days also with our Slack channel, there are things that get discussed in the develop channels that are about upcoming changes, as well as the pull requests, you know, like the move, I think it was actually in 2.5 that we upgraded to Java 8. That was open for pull requests and got a fair bit of discussion as to whether that was a good idea, because some systems would be in trouble. You know, sadly, for licensing reasons, we're never going to be able to bundle Java as part of the toolkit, but yeah, making it available through other things, through Docker or whatever, so that we don't have to worry about that.
I changed slides.
Oh, yeah. Some of the roads I imagine people might go on. Yeah, we're all rule followers here, right? Yeah. What you started out mentioning about the toolkit as sort of a black box you shouldn't modify with sufficient extension points, that's really, I suspect both of us like to think of it that way. You know, the horror stories I mentioned from my older system, I had to hack everything. Right now, I try to not touch the black box at all if I can help it, and I generally haven't had to do that. There's extension points where I need them. One problem with making changes to improve the toolkit in general is that we have had extension points virtually everywhere, which makes any change difficult, because extension points might go away if you combine two steps. And you know, you make the two steps a lot more efficient, but somebody with a plugin somewhere might be crying out in pain. With Preprocess 2, the way of the future, there are fewer extension points, but with more strategic thought there. It's not just, let's put an extension point everywhere. It's, let's think about where these would truly be useful, safe, stable between releases, and let people extend at those points.
So imagine this, you're home, sitting on your couch with the cat. Then you want to add an extension point, and then you ask yourself, are you willing to support this for the next 5 years? And you feel like saying no. So because compared to the JavaScript framework of the week, which will be obsolete in 6 months, it seems that our software is still running in places where it was added years ago. And if the requirements of the users don't change dramatically, they'll still keep on using that same old OpenToolkit version. So with this in mind, for us it's somewhat challenging to decide what sort of extension points are we willing to add now that we need to support for the next, I don't know, 10 years. Let's pretend it's 10 years. And then not have anything break if we modify the code or improve the code, because we promised 10 years ago that this will work forever.
And really that is one of the reasons for the pain in going to 2.0 is that for the first several years of the toolkit, nobody ever had that kind of thought. It was, hey, we have an extension point here. Well, now we're creating this other thing that looks similar. Let's add extension points there. And there were extension points everywhere. There wasn't any real thought behind them or design behind them until this guy got involved and started to say, what are you guys doing? And 2.0 cleaned a lot of that up and made it, a better design. We still had a lot of the legacy in there. You can't rewrite everything from scratch like that, but it got a lot better. But that is why so many of the extension points changed in 2.0, because there was actually thought put into them and into which of these should be there longer term. And it's even better with Reprocess too. I think there's, that is an explicit from scratch. We have this new pipeline. Where are the appropriate places to extend?
So I have a story to offer you. It's not a war story because it was not a war. It was just struggling with bits. Nothing as serious as a war. So last year I worked for a company that had multiple PDF layouts, multiple HTML outputs, EPUB, trough, all sorts of things that they had built on top of 1.5. Originally, everything was written on top of 1.4, and at some point they upgraded to 1.5, and then they built other things on top of it to support their custom requirements, and on top of those they built something else, and then I got involved, and they just asked me to upgrade to the latest Open Toolkit 1.4 at the time. I took a look at their code, and yeah, it was 2.4 at the time. I don't know if they've since upgraded to 2.5. So I took a look at their code, and it was old, upgraded in multiple steps with people who occasionally knew what they were doing, occasionally working with deadline pressures, since coders have this tendency that if you pressure them to produce results faster, they might be able to produce the results, but the results are actually bad. So I just told them I'll rewrite it, and that was the only option. I wasn't able to take the existing plugins and start modifying them, because that would have been yet another layer on top of bad things. So at some point you need to really say you need to rewrite things. That's my experience. In some cases you might be able to make it work, but
and it
sometimes
really
that's
depends.
impossible.
Yeah, it depends quite significantly on what type of customizations you've made. And yeah, and I think if that is the thing I'm thinking about, you should probably also point out this isn't a random person who came to Jarno and he volunteered on his own time to go make all of these changes and do this substantial work. That was a contract job you ended up doing.
4 months.
So
It could have been 3 months, but when you ask something and you get a response like a week from then, and then the target changes, and then at some point they tell you, oh wait, we didn't send you all the material we need to produce. Here's a bunch more. These need to work too. So plus 4 months.
what else did we? Oh, yes.
Well,
right.
I can shout.
Yes, but
Well,
it
for
should
the
be
recording.
recorded also.
There's a switch to Rattle to use Rattle to drive the build process now, and I'm very happy to see that coming up now, because we're going to use the toolkit in a continuous integration pipeline, and everything that can speed up a process and make it easier to manage is very much appreciated. One of the things that I've been pondering is how much can we do to accelerate the build. A lot of stuff is just doing the same thing all over again? Are there ways to reuse intermediate results?
If you get clever, there are. Yeah, I'm not sure how much detail to go into there, because I've thought of ways to do it, but it would be very specific. Like yeah, Jarno should have some microphone here. But yeah, generally when I've thought about it, it isn't reliable enough that I've actually implemented it. But that said,
Okay, so Reprocess 2 makes this a bit easier. It doesn't work out of the box, but in a case where the map hasn't changed, none of the keys have changed, you could cache the results of the map processing and then just continue as if you had started from the beginning. But still, there's no solution that would work out of the box to accelerate that, to cache the intermediate results. One reason, or the only reason for that, is that it hasn't been a driving factor in designing this system. But of course, you keep those things in the back of your head and sort of try and enable them. But you can't cover all requirements, especially since some people would prefer to use OpenToolkit to preview topics. Some want to publish 100,000 topics on one go. Yes, Nick, I'm talking to you. And some people want something in between. So that's just one requirement that could be taken as the driving force for the next version. But unless it works out of the box and is hideously easy to take into use, then people won't actually use it if it requires customization or changes.
one thing that has held me back from trying to do anything there is that when I follow up on requests for that, at least from my user community, I'm not saying this applies to people here, generally what they want is, I want to run a PDF and an HTML build, and you've got all the same topics, so why can't you just go most of the way and then do the two different variants? And they say everything's exactly the same, the content's all exactly the same. They forget to mention they have a DITA-OT file involved. So they're filtering differently for PDF and HTML. It's like, but everything's exactly the same. Yes, but the very first thing we do in the process is filter. The very first thing. So if you have filtered for PDF, as soon as you've done that, you've already branched off and it's not usable for HTML. So the savings would be minuscule for trying to reuse that.
Yeah, so we could have a system where filtering was done at the very end of Reprocess, and then those same users would start to complain that now you're processing in 1,000 topics where my document only contains 10. Why aren't you filtering before? Yeah. And then we'd go.
That is what I usually respond to instant messages from my user community. That exact vocalization. I type it in every time. We do have something else. Oh yeah. So yeah, how do we avoid the bumps? Yeah. So this is really the question of how we get better feedback. What can we do to get more data about the things we're doing? And we talked last year briefly about adding some sort of statistics, some phone home to the toolkit. And we haven't implemented anything like that because we haven't addressed any of the concerns that were raised about it. And we also, again, just limited time, limited developers. We haven't done anything like that. But there may be other ideas from people here. I can hear the crows are trying to pipe up. So.
One option, make all of your plugins open source, and we'll be able to use them in our tests. I assume not every company is willing to open source their plugin results or their plugins just to facilitate us. So compared to, for example, the JavaScript environment, everything seems to work there in open source. So you're able to actually go to NPM, which is the Node Package Management System, pull down 100,000 libraries, test those in some way and verify that, yeah, we didn't break anyone that is depending on us. Whereas we have, well, Robert has a few plugins that we can try out, and then there's the docs plugin. And that's about it. We don't have access to all the other plugins that depend on our code. And that's a challenge when you try to maintain compatibility with the existing environment.
Particularly when we do still have extension points in there that were thrown in the early days of, why not throw an extension point everywhere possible. Yeah. We need your feedback. Yeah, if you don't want your paths to disappear. Yeah. Yes, we must not forget that. Yeah. Yes, don't forget that.
You might not need the complete plugin, just knowledge about the extension points that you're using.
True. Yes. That at least would be a start. Yes. Sorry, that I should repeat that. That we might not need the complete plugins for testing, simply the knowledge that these extension points are being used. That would be a start, certainly. Yes.
One thing you could do to get more of these plugins coming in for testability and more stuff open source, which is obviously good stuff, is that you could try and open a two-way dialogue here, saying that I contribute my plugin to open source, you will test it and say it will break in 3.1. Send me an email. So we know that, not saying, because you can then just put it on your test environment, say, yep, it will break. But it's a heads up. We know that it will break. I have tested our plugins on 2.4. We've not upgraded to 2.5. We've not upgraded to 3. It'll probably work, but at least even just getting an email saying you might need to do something in the future if you have an upgrade is at least a carrot. And as the gentleman in front of me said, I don't need to give you the whole plugin. I just need to give you the plugin where it connects to the black box. I could have a stub. This is the way I'm doing it. I'm stubbing, so I'm doing something here. I could just put an ant echo statement doing something here, and then you've got something which will be testable. Then you'll also get the test bed of usable plugins.
To some extent, yeah. I think that kind of thing would only be possible if it were fully automated, like even the email to you, because we can't do all the other stuff. But knowledge of extension points helps us know when removing an extension point will hurt somebody. But not knowing what you're doing, there are other options for things that could break. A change in the pre-process earlier that removes something we added we didn't think anyone was using. If your plugin made use of that, it's broken. Or if you are adding something that then we didn't expect to be there. I mean, there are infinite possibilities since you can do anything in a plugin. You could add or remove anything along the way.
So we have integration tests for that we use ourselves. It's basically, here's a bunch of source, run it, the output should look like this still. And it's a lot of work to create those tests.
Which is why they're not as good as we'd like, because no one has put in the work to do that.
And we currently, for example, don't have tests to check whether the PDF is exactly the same. And in some cases, the PDF can be exactly the same enough. Yeah, I know you can't say that, but it's similar enough that it's okay. So creating an automated system like that, we get a PhD student to write the PhD on that, and then once someone solved the mystery and how it should be done, we can implement it. But it's difficult. So, for example, with we can come up with the infrastructure of contribute your plugin. We'll try it out. But there are so many ways how it can break that it'll be really difficult. And especially since we can't take the log files, for example, and see if anything changed there, because if we change something in the pre-processing, it'll change. We still need to have the freedom of changing things underneath, and the output will be approximately the same. That's quite challenging to come up with a completely automated system. For example, a programming language like Rust, when they upgrade the version, they'll pull down all the known Rust code that is in the like package management repo and try to compile the code. Does it still compile? Yeah. If a single thing fails, then someone will need to go and see, did we break it or is it just somehow incompatible? With a statically typed programming language, it's a lot easier than with DITA-Open Toolkit output.
Yes. I do also think that if we had a better way to offer, to set up, here is how we integration test our own toolkit. Here is how you can run an equivalent set of tests with your plugins. I don't know how to do that today. If I did that, it would make me much happier with how I'm creating my plugins.
It's fairly easy. You just have to actually create those tests, but running them is easy.
So that's a good point. Yes. Yeah. Well, I may try to help write up instructions on doing that while I try to figure it out. Yeah. Because I think that would be useful. Particularly those who are into heavy plugin development would probably want to have that on their own, and that way they could test it as well without having to contribute plugins somewhere else.
If you never taken a look at OT and how we run our integration server or the automated testing, whenever we make a commit to the repo, we run all the tests. It's about, I don't know, 200, 300 unit tests, about 200 integration tests. It takes about, I don't know, depending on your machine, it takes from 2 to 5 minutes to run all the tests. And we use it in order to catch regression bugs. But then if something happens, like we change one line of XSLT in the HTML output, all the tests break because the output doesn't match what's expected anymore. And that's where human needs to go in and say, yeah, we actually made that change deliberately. So maintaining an automated set of tests requires some work.
And some pain, because that level of, all your tests failed because of this one little tweak makes you think, yeah, that tweak's a good thing, but is it really worth the pain of updating all those tests? It makes it a lot more costly to make good little changes. Most changes don't have that sort of effect, but occasionally they do. Oh, and I should also point out that Jarno had his cat. This is my cat. So, yes. Yeah, you were starting to show me your environment earlier, which, yes.
This is not what I was
okay.
going to talk about. Last year, there was some talk about XSpec, the XSLT unit tests. Is there a plan to integrate it maybe a little more into the process of the toolkit development? But it seems like a good idea. I think it would help a lot of people starting to test stuff and also increase the reproducibility of problems. When stuff changes, and since it introduces test-driven development, it would maybe help not break stuff without knowing it.
I don't think we have plans for that. It's another one of those things. Oh, sorry, Jarno has plans for adding that.
No. XSpec is already being used, but
it's limited.
It works really well on unit level testing.
Yeah.
Say you have a single template or single function in XSLT that if you give it 4, will give you back, I don't know, 27. Yeah. If you give it 7, it'll give you an X. And if you know these things, that what you give it, what you should be getting back, those are convenient for finding regression bugs. If you modify that function, you know if something breaks, if the contracts between input and output no longer apply. In most cases, you have a HTML page, you open it in a browser, and now it doesn't look right. So it's a bit more difficult to do with a whole page, with the whole output. But we do use unit testing at Java and XSLT level, and then the integration tests will actually run through the whole, either whole pre-processing 2, or then HTML,
yeah.
XHTML.
Yeah, and so the XSpec works really well for the functions, and we've got a lot of those. Like most of our functions, I think, have that level of testing. But so much of the other stuff is entirely dependent on the context of the element in a data document. And as I think most of you know, writers are endlessly creative. The data spec allows you to be endlessly creative, and you can combine every data function and every data element in any kind of way. And our tests don't cover all of that, and you can't really write an XSpec test for that because you can't test to make sure that your paragraph is processed the same way in every possible context. You can't write all of those. So the integration tests do a better job of catching a lot of that, but the integration tests are also limited. That's subject to people putting in time to create them. A lot of them are very old. I did quite a bit of work on that for 3.0, trying to clean up all of our integration tests, and that was really prompted by me finding that in one of the fix packs for 2.5, an option broke, and it appeared to be in our integration test. Like there was a test case that used this option, but the option was meaningless in that context. Like it was an up levels test for a document that didn't have any up levels. And so I thought we were testing this thing, we weren't, and that prompted me to go through and really check pretty much every one of our integration tests to see what they were doing, and where I could clean them up, delete things that were useless or duplicate, and then add things, extend them where I could. But that said, it's nowhere near complete. We don't test everything. We can't test everything, but we should try to cover as much as we can.
And you only test your own software. You don't test your customer's software. So we only test our stuff. We can't test your stuff. And the tests we have in our system could probably be used for your plugins too. But in the end, we write our tests to cover our own behinds so that we don't break things.
And for me, being involved in the project, to cover what my customers are doing, because everybody has their patterns of using data and patterns of using particular options. And so as I add those, or as I discover things that aren't working properly, I make sure that those are added to the test cases. But that's for my own environment, that road I travel. That's not going to cover everybody else's options or combinations of source.
Can I say also some words?
No.
Some words.
Yes.
We use the DITA-OT toolkit, and we have our own tests on our site that run every night. So whenever we find a problem, Rattle is in touch. So probably also something distributed like this will work better than people giving you like 100 plugins or 200 plugins, and then what you can do with them.
Yeah.
So probably it's easier. But what it will be interesting, it will be that to have maybe more communication between people that use the Open Toolkit and the main developers, let's say, or to notify you when things break, and maybe it's something to do with the toolkit, not necessarily with their plugins.
Yeah.
One of the problems is that if I make a change and then someone notifies me 6 months later that this broke, it would have been easier if they had told me 5 minutes after I made the change. Because most people test their things and migrate their things over to the latest one on which I'm working a lot later. So, because we're constantly developing the bleeding edge, and everyone is adopting basically the stable version, or then they're still stuck on something that's a lot older. So it would be really nice if people had integration tests for their plugins that also covered the development version of Open Toolkit. And it can be done, but I suppose most companies don't want to invest in something like that, even though it's just a CI system running the tests. But having tests is meaningless unless you actually react to breaking tests. And if things break all the time, people become blind to those breakages, and then they just don't care.
Like you said, don't put warnings in the log. People ignore warnings. You don't react until it becomes major. Yeah.
Yeah, but this will save time, when they actually upgrade to the
Yep.
latest version or something.